I've got a submission here from airmaxx23 who's asking just for some general tuning advice. I checked your command line dump and everything old is new again. You're using MultiWii23 PID controller, which has become very popular these days as Boris has focused his attention on it again. It's the bell bottoms of PID controllers, right? Everything old comes back around again and is popular. So I got to remind myself what the general ranges are for P, especially on MultiWii23. But that was actually the first controller I used back when I started flying, literally using a flipboard and literally using MultiWii, not Clean Flight. So yeah, I think I can resurrect that part of my brain again. So let's take a look at your logs. And the first thing I did was go to this section of the log where you are at basically full throttle, like as close to full throttle as you can get, really, and look at what your P term is doing. And we can see here that your P term, it is getting active. We're seeing some surging in the P term. And here even we see what I would call oscillation. These regular spikes here with a very smooth line and a very regular width and spacing. That feels to me like P-term oscillation. So it's starting to come out. Good, good, good. Now you've dropped the throttle. Presumably you're falling because I assume you're operating in a gravitational field. I think that's fair. And then as you raise the throttle again, we should get some prop wash and let's see what happens. Here you go, you're raising the throttle. And again, we get some nice spikes here. So it feels like this P term is it's not too low, right? We are seeing it get active. We're seeing it get out of bed. Now the rest of the time, it's a little harder to judge. The throttle is relatively low a lot of the time, but we do see it get active. Like here, you're at a relatively low throttle, but we do see it start to get active and wake up. We see it crossing the line and the magnitude goes up. So I feel like your P gain on roll is close to correct. It's pretty close. Your D term is quite inactive. It is very close to the 0 axis almost all of the time. Even here, where the P term is getting really active, the D term is not doing very much. So if this were my tune, I would probably leave P alone and raise D. And the raising of D will sharpen up the P a little bit. Remember that D doesn't just dampen P, but it also accelerates P. It works both ways. D makes P do more of whatever it's already doing. So if P is accelerating, D makes it accelerate more. And if D is slowing down, or if P is slowing down, D makes it slow down more. So it sharpens it up and makes it maybe a twitchier is a way to say it, but also more damped, right? It's more willing to get going and also more willing to slow down. So anyway, raising D will potentially help with that. Now I can't help but notice we've got a roll here. So let's take the opportunity to look at that. Oh, wait, one more thing. I do notice on D that you've got some high frequency components, these very sharp spikes here. So possibly leave that alone and just see if it matters, but possibly add some filtering either by changing your D term cut hertz or by changing your D term averaging number and raising your D term averaging number. I still am not 100% confident on which of those is the best to do under different circumstances, but try either of those. But first, just leave it alone and see if that actually makes any problems for you. It may not. These high frequency components may not really matter. All right, so let's take a look at this roll now. We're going into the roll. P term pushes us into the roll. P term rises, gyro rises. I term zeroes out as the stick is deflected. That's normal. As the stick returns to center, gyro rebounds as the gyro crosses the line, so that's a rebound. And you can see that compared to the other video I did in this batch where we had the rebound and then it slowly came back to the line, but it never oscillated. Here we have some actual ringing or oscillation where boom, 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 boom. This is excess P gain or inadequate D gain, okay? This ringing at the end of the sharp move. It may be too much P gain or it may be not enough D gain. And I've said that your D term looks relatively inactive the rest of the time. So this is additional evidence that you may want to raise your D gain. And that should help bring that down. If raising your D, now don't go crazy. D gain is like, I've come to think of it like salt in a soup, right? A little bit of salt, not enough salt, terrible, right? A little bit of salt, good. Too much salt, terrible. And it's easy to cross the line and put too much in, and then you've ruined the whole thing. So don't go overboard with the D gain, okay? Just enough, just a dab, okay? But right now you are at on roll, you're at 6, okay? So that's not very much, right? And that's good. That's good. You did the right thing. You're tuning your P gains with your D gains low. That's exactly the right thing. That's what I tell everybody to do, and you followed the advice. So kudos on that. But you've got your P gain pretty close to correct, and now this is the time when it's time to start bringing the D gain back in and watching for excess D gain, watching for the D term like flipping out and yanking the P term around. But you can afford to bring this up perhaps as high as 15. 5, maybe even a little higher because I don't feel 100% confident on how the multi-Wii PID controller works. But I feel like you could start working this up and you've probably got a good range to work with here. Like, I would immediately take it to like 12 and see how that flies, okay? Let's take a look at pitch. Okay, so I immediately see some oscillations here. These are P-term oscillations, these spikes here. And also notice how in this scenario, the P-term oscillation comes on strong, right? It sort of comes out of nowhere, bam! Strong oscillations, regular spacing, regular frequency, smooth. That's P-term oscillation. And notice how over time they sort of decay. That is also a characteristic of excess P gain or P-term oscillation, okay? This is very classical P-term oscillation. Your throttle's not very high, but something's going on in your flight that's causing that. If we look at high throttle here, interestingly, at high throttle, you don't see real oscillations. The P-term is doing something, but we don't really see any oscillations jumping out on pitch. But here we do. Okay. So I feel like your P gains on pitch and roll are definitely high enough and perhaps on the edge of too high, depending on what your tolerance is for oscillations. If you have a high tolerance for oscillations, then they may be exactly where you want them. I don't feel like these oscillations are at the point where you would have unwanted flight effects, except for that ringing at the end of the roll, right? If that ringing doesn't come into line when you raise the D a little bit, maybe as high as 20, but probably not higher than that, I don't think, unless multi-Wii PID controller has some real surprises that I'm not aware of. But if that doesn't come into line, then I would think about dropping my roll P gain a little bit. But again, we can see the same thing on pitch that we saw on roll. Your D term is just not doing much of anything, and you have a lot of room to raise that. And that may help tame some of these oscillations, allow you to keep your P gain high and sharp without having to, and then bring some of those oscillations into line without having to reduce the P gain. If we look at yaw, yaw is a little trickier to tune just with Blackbox. Yeah, let's look at full throttle. What do we see at full throttle? I think yaw looks a little low. P gain on yaw looks a little low. I'm just looking at the magnitude of these back and forth spikes here. I see a lot of times when the magnitude is not very high. A few times it gets high right here. maybe. I guess maybe depending on how much high throttle stuff you do. Like this is probably excessive, but if it only happens when you peg the throttle, you could probably live with it, right? So if you're constantly pegging the throttle, I'd probably leave this alone. But if you're often flying in the range of like 14 to 1600, right, I would probably raise P gain a little bit on yaw, but not too much. Maybe 0.5 as maybe. Okay. Well, I hope that's helpful. Thanks for your submission and happy flying.